We're in the fifth chapter, halacha 17. You're allowed to cut down a tree for wood and Shmitta before there's fruit on it. But once it starts becoming a fruit, you're not allowed to cut it down because you're losing the chance of eating the fruit, because by cutting it down, the fruit is not going to ripen. The pasuk says the Shemitah produce will be for you to eat, for you to eat, but not to be a loss, not to be wasted. But once it got fruit, then they reached the level of maturity where you could take off meiser, then you could cut it down because it gave its fruit. So now the tree itself, well, it says the law of Shmitta is nullified from it. Sure. Yeah. We mentioned earlier that for the most part, no. But if there are certain conditions, if the land was going to be very parched, there are certain type cases where you could water it. Right. So and in Eretz Yisrael, right? Obviously, there's no problem with Shemitah here. So yeah, there were certain ways, or you could water it on Shemitah, but there are some limitations. But also the thing is that watering doesn't seem to be as bad of a thing as working the tree. It doesn't seem that. Meaning, like in regard to pruning, you can't prune the tree because that helps it grow. And then there are certain things that are indirect. If things weren't for the tree itself, it's more lenient. So watering is on the more lenient thing, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you got it on there, and it's going to
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you're allowed personally to take the rest of it?
No.
Okay.
So you still can't act like you're the owner. So you could only take a few meals worth.
Okay.
I mean, if the birds get to it, that's okay, because the animals and the birds are allowed to have the Shemitah fruit. Yeah, for sure. But you're also allowed to pick. But the question is, if they fall, can you take more than that? I'm not sure about. I don't think so. Because if it's good fruit and it's on the floor, on the ground already, what does it matter if you picked it off the floor or if you picked it off the tree? The fact that you're having a lot is showing like as if you have ownership over it. The biggest question that I haven't seen people ask is, we spread last week's parsha about not cutting down fruit trees, and these halachas are cutting down fruit trees. So Rav Moshe has said that when there was a need to cut it down, you'd be allowed to cut down a fruit tree, but you can't cut it down for no reason, because then that would be wasteful of the fruit tree. I think some people think that there's a blanket prohibition against cutting down the fruit trees, and it's not as blanket as people think. Okay, so Rav Kook mentions in this case, it's talking about a case where it's not a destructive, it's about tashchis. For example, where he doesn't say there's a shortage of wood, but the wood is worth more than the fruit. Or this tree was harming more valuable trees that were nearby, or the land that it's on was more valuable than the value of the crop from this tree for things like that. So in this case, once it brought forth its fruit on Shemitah, you could cut it down on Shemitah, because then there's no problem of losing Shemitah produce either. So they spoke too soon. If Cook specifically spoke about this. So these are examples where you're allowed to cut down a fruit tree in general. So if it was on Shmita, you would have to wait. If you want to cut it down, you have to wait till it brought forth its fruit for the year. Halacha 18. When can you not cut it down? Meaning when's it considered that the fruit started developing that's not ripe yet? Carobs, buxer, when they start looking like chains, grow, and grapes when they have a seed in them, and olives when they uh, have a bud, and other ones when they have a very the first stage of a fruit. But I actually saw here, did I? Oh no, I saw it. I don't have it on my phone. It was a remarkable picture of a blackberry from before it was a bud. They had like 15 different pictures, and they laid it out like this to show different levels of the budding, and then the flower, and then the early levels of the fruit. But I don't have it on my phone. I don't think I could find it either quickly. So, and you can't cut the early dates on Shemitah year because you're losing them. The Imain dark and also farm, but if they are never going to ripen, it's all they do is they start blooming and then they never ever ripen. Then you're able to cut that out in their very early stage. So, Rav Kook says the explanation is so when the carobs start being chained, so they start to weigh down the branches like a chain. That's how the Rashi explains it. And the Rebbe Malki Tzedek says when they get a long strand, just like a chain is a long strand. And then it's going to thicken and it returns and the bucks are develop on that strand. And the Rambam Perek Mishnah says when the branches of the tree began to spread out like a chain, so it implies that according to the Rambam, it's a stage even before there's any fruit visible yet, but it has to do more with the branches getting ready to start developing the fruit. Okay, the grapes when they have a seed. So Gemara Pesachim seems to be that when they reach a certain level of having a seed, which is the size of the white bean, and the Yerushalmi says that the amount of if you would squeeze it, some liquid would come out. So, meaning obviously, this is true with estrogam actually. So estrogam, if they have small estrogam, they water the obviously not on Shmita. I don't think they would do this, but they would water the tree a lot, and the estrogam would get bigger because of all the extra water, and then they're eventually going to shrink. So depending on how close you are, I don't think they would ship those to America. But in Israel, I heard from a posek who was an expert in these things that they do that sometimes. So obviously, they start out very little and not that juicy at the beginning. So it has to. So it's a stage where you'd squeeze it, and a little bit of liquid would come out. That's according to the Yerushalmi. And to the Rebbe Malki Tzedek and the Mishnah, it seems that this is the same. This equivalent of squeezing it and some liquid comes out is the equivalent of the size of it's the size of a white bean. And the Rambam Perek Mishnah says that this is when they start developing the seed inside of them. So the translation that we're using actually uses the Rambam's explanation in Perek Mishnah to describe what the Rambam's saying here, which is a very good thing to explain the Rambam with the Rambam's own words. Okay, and the olives when they bud, and other trees when they have the first underdeveloped fruit. The Vilna Gaon says, based on the Yerushalmi, and his student, the Beis Yisrael, in the Pasuk Shulchan says, there's no prohibition against cutting the olives once they bud, unless the bud has the amount that if they would grow up, when they would ripen, there would be the amount of a quarter bushel, a kav, I'm just translating this bushel of olives, then you're not allowed to cut it any year. And in this case, it would certainly be Asur and Shmita, even with those that you're allowed to cut the rest of the year. So what about if it's a tree that normally you'd be able to cut down during the year? Meaning because the wood is very valuable, or it's harming the other trees nearby, or you need the real estate that it's on that's valuable. So in that case, when the tree is more valuable than the produce, but if the tree does not have that many olives anymore, then there's never a problem any year to destroy the tree. So there is some type of thing the Vilna Gaon says in regard to olive trees, that once olive trees are not that productive, you're allowed to chop it down, even if the wood isn't more valuable, but there's very little yield from it. So in that case, you'd be allowed to cut it on Shmita also, or any other tree. Seems to be not just olives. That you have this amount that you need this bushel, that you can't cut it down the rest of the year. That it's only prohibited because of baltashches to cut a tree if it has a certain yield of fruits, even if they're valuable. But if it's a very small amount, under a bushel or a kav, you're allowed to cut it down, even midin baltashches, meaning not specifically for Shmita. But if it doesn't develop this much, then there's no prohibition to cut it down on Shmita, even if it started growing. So the thing is, if the tree yields very little, you can cut it down on Shmita after the fruit started developing, even though it's not ripe enough yet. Since it's so little fruit, it's not considered losing Shmita fruit. And in regard to other trees, when the fruit, you see the fruit on them, the Bartanura on the Mishnah says that that's when they are leaves. But Rashi and Gemara Brachos says when they have a fruit, which is much closer to being done. So I was explaining it in lines with Rashi, that when the fruit is there. But according to the Bartanura, it seems that even before there's I don't know if he means, if it means that there's leaves on the tree, or that there's the bud that's eventually going to flower is there, even though the bud is certainly not a fruit. Yeah.
And water or not, whatever, comes on the belt, couple on the tree. But valuable.
Mhm.
Olive wood is very valuable.
Yeah.
So, cut the wood, you're
So when we say product of the land, the stuff that has Shmita produce is stuff that's edible for people, or it can be used for dye. So wood, because wood isn't edible, it doesn't have kedusha shvius. So there is a machlokas about flowers. Some say if the flowers smell nice, then they have kedusha shvius, even though flowers are not edible. And then, of course, it made me think of nowadays with some of the fancy cooking. Oh, I'll tell you, I actually saw for the first time in a certain big fruit market zucchini flowers.
Yes.
So I was thinking, the zucchini flowers. That's the thing. They $2 a piece. So I saw that they were $2.49 for a pound or whatever, or for, I don't know. It was a piece.
Like a week ago.
So I saw them a couple, like 2 months ago, and it was, I think it was right before Tisha B'Av, and it said like $2.49. I don't know if it was runner up, but it's much cheaper to buy zucchini than the zucchini flowers.
Oh, yeah.
So the question is, and I think I brought this up months ago, according to, let's say, someone like him who eats the dandelion things, so those are not really food. So does it really have kedusha shvius? I don't think so. Now these zucchini things, I don't think so either, but
You can bread them and fry them up. That's what people do with the flour. It's a delicacy.
it's like the deep fried Oreo cookies. I haven't never had those either, but yeah. So again, I don't think that using flours in cooking, some people do it. I don't think that it would that wouldn't make it Michael Adam. I don't think, unless it would fall under the category of which I still don't think so. But we saw that there's a category of certain things that sometimes you pick it for animal food and sometimes you pick it for people food. So it depends on your intention. If you intended to do it for people food, then the laws of Shmitta apply to it. If you intended to pick it for animal food, then animal. But these things certainly aren't ever animal food. They're either nothing or or some people use them. But I would think the amount of people, the percentage of people who use them are so small. I don't think that there would be kedusha shmiyas for that. I don't know about next for zero. When you see the price that they're charging in the fruit market, it's not. If it's next to zero, they wouldn't be selling them.
Right. But I don't.
So according to the Gra, I don't know why, but there's a Gra who says that when the tree itself has a very small yield, it's not considered as if it's developing fruit.
Well, that's true because I would see. Little bit. But that's a short of
Mm. So part of the halacha about tashkis is not just if you need the land, the wood is very valuable or more valuable than the fruit, or you need the real estate is worth very much more than. But I don't know why, but the Gra says if if it yields very little fruit, there's no baltashvis to chop it down. Yotas. You're not allowed to burn straw or hay from Shmita because you could feed your animal with it. And again, so you're causing it to be lost as food for the animals. But you can use the waste parts of olives and grapes, meaning when you take it to the wine press or some stuff that's waste product over there and it's dry enough and you could use that to burn. So I guess it's talking about for the most part in your oven. Okay, so interesting. So because what's his name died last week, Arkady mentioned Thatcher because Gorbachev died. So Arkady mentioned Thatcher. So what does it mean? What does the name Thatcher come from? They would thatch roofs. I forgot what they used to use back then before they tin, but also something else. What? Yeah, straw. Right. So straw. So what about using straw for your roof or straw back in the day when you don't let the bed bugs bite, when you would have straw mattresses and stuff. So if Cook says right here, the straw and Shmita, you're not allowed to put it in your mattress or in your pillow because you're not using it for its highest and best use, which is as animal food. So I'm saying probably not for your roof also back then when they use it for roof.
Yeah, I mean, but I believe different.
Waste product of the other stuff. Right. So I'm not a big expert at which one's which, but since it's animal food, you can't use it for your mattress during Shmita. But if someone else did it, then it's considered as if they made it hefker and it was already made beer. The Cheshek Shlomo, who is a commentary on the Tosafta, says that this is talking about when other people put it into the mattress or into the pillowcase, then it's as if they did beer on it, and then you don't have to do beer again, and then you could benefit from that, use that pillow or mattress with the straw that's inside of it. But if you do it, you're not allowed to use it. If you put it into a pillow or a mattress, you're not allowed to use it. And they punished him with a fine, a knas, that he then would have to take it out of the pillow or the mattress and then put it out when the beer time comes. And the Minchas Bikurim, I don't know who that is, in the Mishnah chapter 5, Mishnah Yud Aleph says it doesn't matter whether you did put it in the mattress or in the pillowcase or someone else. If it was done after Shmitta year, once the Zman Biur came, by doing this, it's as if you did Biur. But if you put it in the pillow or the mattress before the Biur time came, when it's still available for the animal food, then you're not allowed to have any other benefit from it, and you have to feed it to your animal. And it appears from the Radvaz on the commentator to the Rambam on this halacha says that you could make a distinction between fine straw, which is usually used for animal, as opposed to thick ones that you don't feed the animals. That the thick ones you could use because it's not considered animal food, and then you could put it into your pillow or your mattress or burn it in your oven if you want. Okay, what happens if you improperly put hay or straw into your oven on Shmitta, and it should have been used for animal food? So you're not allowed to have benefit from it. So what do you do? So you have to let the oven cool off. You can't benefit from that heat. And Rav Kook says it appears it doesn't matter whether it's a new oven or an old oven. Okay, so even if it's a new oven. So the halacha here, the Gemara discusses in a few places that if you have a brand new oven, the first time it's heated up really finishes the oven, because they were porcelain or earthenware ovens. So the first time you would fill it up with the fuel and light it, that was finishing the oven. So if you use something that was aser bana, like either stuff from an Asherah tree, which is a worshipped tree, or orla, which you're not allowed to write benefit, you would have to break the oven, because you use something that you're not allowed to get benefit to make the oven into the oven, and you'd have to break the oven. Whereas if it was already in a ready oven that had already been used before, if you would burn an illegal fuel in there because it's something that we're not allowed to receive benefit from, then you just have to let it cool down, because you can't benefit from it. But once it's cooled down, you could then put in allowable fuel, proper fuel, and then cook in that oven. So in regard to the Shmitta stuff, you never would have to break it, even if this was the first time the oven was fired up, so it really became usable as an oven. In this, by doing this, you don't have to break the oven. The Rambam says in 4 halachas later than where we are, that straw and hay of Shmitta until the second rain of the 8th year has kedusha, the sanctity of Shmitta, and as for anything that is animal food, and you're not allowed to have any other benefit other than having it as the animal food. But after the second rain, then you're allowed to burn it, meaning in your oven, or have any hana that you want from it, because then it doesn't have any sanctity anymore. So also, it ends up, according to the Rambam, there's no halacha beer for it. According to the Rambam, beer means you have to destroy it, but for this animal food, he doesn't say that you. Meaning we paskin based on the Ramban and some other the Ravid or combination of them, that beer is just declaring it ownerless. So the Ramban Shita, not the Ravid Shita, because the Ravid has 2 stages, and the Ravid holds eventually like the Rambam also. But the Rambam says after that second beer, then you can do whatever you want with it. So beer doesn't apply at all to straw or hay, according to the Rambam. And the Rash says in the 9th chapter of the Mishnayos that it still the hay and the straw has sanctity of Shmitta, even after the second rain. except from the ones that you had left in the field. And now that they got wet, they're not really usable anymore. But stuff that you had taken into the house, you're not allowed to, even if it's several years later, you're not allowed to have hana from it. So according to the Rash, there's no beer either, but there's no way out. So according to the Rambam, eventually you could use it. According to the Rash, you could only use the stuff that was left in the field and then got soaked. Or even if it didn't rain, then at that time that the rain should have come, then you would be allowed to take it into your house. But the stuff that you had taken, you're never allowed to use. And the Rebbe Melchizedek says that once the stuff in the field is now not usable after the rain came, or the rain should have come, then he's a middle sheet, then even the stuff in the house now becomes mutter. So he's not as strict as so he's in between the strictness of the Rash, but not as lenient as the Rambam. And the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, as opposed to the Rash, Rabbeinu Shimshon, but the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher says that the main sanctity of Shmitta on straw and hay is that it has to be considered as animal food. That's if it's small ones, that's only if you gathered it to be animal food. But if you didn't gather it to be animal food, then it's not considered animal food. And you're allowed to have hana, you could burn it, this and that, you could use it in mortar, even before the rain. So I happened to mention a few minutes ago that there's certain things that depends what you pick it for. But that was if it could have been animal food or people food. According to the Rosh, this is either people food, animal food, or not food at all. The Rosh actually says, so if you picked it to be fuel, I guess you're allowed to pick it to be fuel. But he doesn't say you, but he says you picked it not to be animal food. Then you're allowed to use it. It doesn't necessarily say that you're allowed to pick it with the intention to use it as fuel. Right, so you would gather, just like you're allowed to gather for food for yourself, you'd be allowed to gather hay and if it's a horse and it eats like a horse, you could get a lot because that's how much the horse needs for a couple of days. So yeah, so there'd be no problem for that because if you have a lot of horses, you could take a lot of hay because that's the regular. Look, the thing is, we say that you feed them this and that, but if they really came from, let's say, Arabia, some of these horses, they didn't grow barley, I don't think, in Arabia either, right? So it's not really their natural food. I'm not disagreeing with you, but sometimes people assume this is what they ate. But if I'm saying, so that's why I've mentioned many times, as much as Ireland depended on the potato, they didn't have potatoes in there until after they brought it back from here. Rashi and Gemara Taina says that when you are allowed to burn and use Shmitta straw and hay, that's until the second reign of Shmitta itself. Meaning, according to the Rambam and the other opinions, it's the reign of the 8th year. Rashi says no, it's the hay. It's already at the beginning, the winter of Shmitta year. So that passed already, the rainy season. And then you're allowed to use straw and hay for everything, and you could burn it in your oven or to keep you warm, where there's no other wood available, because in those places that didn't have wood available for burning fires, straw and hay was not considered animal food, because people needed to use it to heat their homes or to use it in to fuel their ovens. But however, Shmitta does have on them, but that only means you can't waste it. But if you're burning it because you're going to cook with it, that's not considered wasting. But just to burn it, you want to have a bonfire, that's a wasteful, that's wasting it even according to Rashi. Okay, Chaf. If you had a bathhouse or a schwitz that they use Shmitta hay or straw to heat it up, you're allowed to bathe in it if you paid to use it. But if you're an important person, so sometimes someone's important, it's covered for the place to have an important VIP person there. So maybe they put in other stuff to make it smell nice or this or that. So maybe they put in, let's say, cinnamon sticks or something. And so for them to use the cinnamon for that is not the highest and best use of cinnamon. So they're misappropriating Shmitta produce, not to its highest and best thing. So if you're an important person, you shouldn't go to any heated bathhouse on Shmitta, because it's not your fault directly, but because of you, they might put in some type of something that they shouldn't put in there that has Kedusha Shvius. No, you'd be allowed to produce spices to use them in your food, but also you probably wouldn't be allowed to have it. Usually spices can last years, but it would probably have to be done by the time of the biur. But the problem is here is that they use, let's say, cinnamon sticks when they heated up the bathhouse because they get the nice smell. So the problem is that you could use it if you're cooking it in your food, but you couldn't use it as fuel to heat up the pool. That's the problem in the halacha. So if Cook says kal v'chomer that you're allowed to use the bathhouse for free, it's not just if you pay, even if it's free. But the chiddush is that even if you pay and it looks like you're paying for the use of Shmitta produce, it looks like you're doing a business with Shmitta, but still it's mutter. And if you're important, you can't. So the Ravid asks on this halacha that the Ravid's opinion is you're only allowed to use the pool or the bathhouse if it's cold. When they used straw and hay of Shmitta to heat it up, but you're never allowed to do it for money. And an important person, even if it's for free, is not allowed to use the warm bathhouse, because it's like, what's it called? The celebrity comes into the restaurant, they give him a free meal and this and that. So it's the same type of thing, because it's good for the business. For him coming for free is like free advertising, so it's worth more than being a paying customer. So that's the Ravid. That they could brag, who uses our bathhouse or uses our schwitz, Mr. VIP over here, the Cub Super Bowl champion, from 35 years ago on the Bears, or a champion, or what Gene Cherney used to say, there was a barbershop where Tridiak, the goalie, the Soviet goalie, went. Yeah. So I mean, he didn't say that the hockey goalie, yeah. The Hawks that have used to pay him to be the unofficial goalie coach. I mean, he was called goalie coach, but he could show up whenever he wanted. I mean, you know who I'm talking about? He was the great Soviet goalie in the Olympics and this and that. But Gene said that he was so big, when he walked through the door, he filled up the whole door. So he was such a good goalie because he was so big. But and the Tosas on Sheshem, based on the Yerushalmi, says that if the bathhouse is owned by important people, then no one could use it if they use Shmitta, straw, and hay to heat it up. And the Tiferes Yisrael, that's the Yachanu Boaz, says that anyone can be strict and consider yourself an Adam Chashav, meaning sometimes there's a prohibition called Yura. Yura is to be too from and to be too strict on things. But in order to make yourself as if you're an important person and say, I'm not going to use it, you're allowed to be strict for this matter. And the Malacha Shlomo on the Mishnah says that there's no permission to use a bathhouse that was heated with the straw and hay of Shmitta. No one's allowed to use it, not even an important person, except after the second rain, because then, since you're allowed to burn and do whatever you want with the hay, still an important person has to refrain from using that bathhouse even after it's mutter for everyone else. And it appears that this opinion holds that you're only allowed to burn and use the hay and straw that was already left in the field. But once it was left in the field, it's not so good for fuel anymore. But the stuff that it's in the house always remains prohibited. So we saw that that was the Rash's opinion, and we saw that the Rebbe Malki Tzedek had that middle opinion that the stuff in the house is always also the stuff in the field eventually becomes mutter, whereas according to the Rambam, both of them are always going to be mutter. But because people, you can't tell which straw and hay they're using, people always will assume that the worst, that it was stuff that was taken into people's houses. Therefore, an important person has to be strict. The Kesef Mishnah, the author of the Shulchan Aruch and the author of the famous commentary Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam on this halacha says, we're talking about hay and straw before the second raining, when they were still completely, you're forbidden to have any hana from it except for your animals eating it. And therefore, you're not allowed to, lechatchila, use it to heat the bathtub. But b'diavad, if you did, you are allowed to use that bathhouse or that schwitz. And the Kesef Mishnah also says that that you are allowed to use the straw and hay for human bathing, even before the second rain, because heating up water for a bath is like making a paste, like an ointment. And we said that you're not allowed to use human food to make a ointment, but you're allowed to use animal food for an ointment. So this is comparing the hot water to almost like a medicine, which you're allowed to make out of animal food. Now, there's a very famous Gemara that they used to, the medicine in those days was if you had a surgery, they would wash you with warm water, hot water, I think for the first 3 days, whatever. So there's a Gemara about what happens if the water, you had warmed up water to wash the baby with on the third day after the bris, which was Shabbos, and it spilled. Can you warm up water on Shabbos? Because it was considered a sakana in those days, when their knowledge of medicine, to not wash the baby in hot water. So from that perspective, I think it's easy to understand this Kesef Mishnah, that it was considered, I mean, it's not exactly like a medicinal paste, an ointment that you would make with animal food, but it was considered a medical treatment to a certain extent. And not necessarily that you were sick, but if someone was taking a bath, to use warm was much better than taking a cold bath, which people, they may have thought you got sick from taking a cold bath. I don't know. But I would explain, I think it's easy to understand the Kesef Mishnah along those lines. And the quote so many portion that doesn't usually quote. The Mishnah Rishona, which is a commentary on the Mishnah, says, even though you're allowed to bathe in a bathhouse or a schwitz, that they incorrectly use straw or hay of Shmitta before it was before the time that it was permitted. However, you need to use something else with sanctity of Shmitta in place of it. Meaning, we mentioned that if you buy Shmitta produce with money, the money gets the produce, gets the sanctity. So what we're saying here is that if you use this bathhouse, you have to use something else that didn't have Shmitta sanctity. You have to treat that as Shmitta sanctity, as like an exchange for the straw that was burned to heat up this pool. Just like something that you improperly bought with Shmitta produce, let's say you had money had changed hands, so this money had Shmitta sanctity, so really you're only allowed to buy human food with it, we said, but you bought, let's say, you bought land, or you bought treif animal, which you can't eat. Obviously, a kosher animal you could eat. Animals don't have shvius, but you're allowed to buy human food with the thing, or you bought avada. So then you have to use an equivalent amount of the value equivalent to that in Shmita. And the Radvaz, the commentator of the Rambam on this halacha, says that if an important person is not allowed to use a bathhouse in Shmita, that they usually use straw or hay, and to include other stuff to have good smelling stuff, that you're not allowed to burn on Shmita because you're not using them for their highest and best use, even if they I don't understand what he's saying here. I think if it's in, oh, I missed the first few lines. That's why it doesn't. An Adam Chashav isn't allowed to do it in a place where sometimes they put good smelling stuff in, even if even if they don't put good smelling stuff in this case. Meaning they take some vanilla or they take some cinnamon sticks, which this is certainly not their highest and best use. Since it's commonly done, even if we know today that they didn't, you're still the Adam Chashav, the important person, is not allowed to use that that bathhouse. So we still have a little bit more here, and we have 2 more short ones to finish the perek. So hopefully we'll be able to finish the perek in a few minutes. And the Radvaz also says that this is talking about when, in general, when they use straw and hay, which don't smell good, then you have to worry that they put in something good to kind of counteract the bad smell. But if they just use wood to heat it, there's no bad smell. We don't have to assume that they're going to put something good smelling in. So then there's no problem for even an important person to use that bathhouse. And the Vilna Gaon says that you're not allowed to use the heated bathhouse that was heated with the hay and straw of Shmitta, is if you don't calculate the value of the fuel to pay for it. But if they so this we know from already 15 years ago, the fuel surcharge. So if they're charging you a fuel surcharge to use the bathhouse, then you're not allowed to use that bathhouse because you're paying specifically for the Shmitta straw and hay. And that's literally involving, buying and selling Shmitta produce. And it looks like this is also the Vilna Gaon says that even in a normally proper way, it's only when they heated up water for washing. So the benefit that you're getting is only coming from the water and not from the actual straw or hay. But when it's a schwitz, so it's a difference. So it's a difference if it's a bathhouse, the pool, or the schwitz. The pool is okay because you're not getting direct benefit from the heat. You're only getting benefit from the water, which had been heated up. But if you use the schwitz, then the sauna, then there's no medium in between the heat from the straw and the benefit that you're getting out. Then you're never allowed to use that sauna if these were straw and hay that is not allowed to be burned. And it seems from the Beis Yisrael in the Pasuk Shulchan, based on the Ravid's pshat, that the main prohibition that an important person is not allowed to use this bathhouse is only when you heat it up for him. But he's lenient that if it was just heated up in general and then the important person comes, because it wasn't done for the important person, it's not prohibited. Okay, Chaf Aleph. Haklipim v'agarina shemuter b'truma l'zarim. So the shells and seeds that if it was in a truma fruit. Now truma is given to the Kohen. Non-Kohen has a death penalty, a heavenly death penalty if he eats it. It's truma produce. But if it's a seed or a shell that is considered inedible and therefore it's not considered truma and therefore even non-Kohanim could eat it, then there's no sanctity of Shmitta on it. And they're like wood, unless you can use it as a dye. If you could use it as a coloring agent, as a dye, then it's considered a dye for Shmitta. And core, this says hearts of palm. So it's some type of softish wood that was soft enough to kind of eat. So hearts of palm, that it gets bigger every year, and at the beginning, before it gets hard, you're able to eat it. That's Rashi, quoting Rashi in Eruvin. So how come it has kedusha shvius if it's not really a fruit or a vegetable or something like that? So that means because it's still soft and you could eat it, but once it gets hard, it's literally like wood, which is just like wood that has no kedusha shvius. So this is what you actually asked at the beginning. Kedusha shvius, it comes from the ground, but it's wood. There's no kedusha shvius on wood. And these type of things, you're not allowed to boil these things. The unripe fruit or these hearts of palm, and then some that you leave on the tree. Okay, the unripe fruit, you're not allowed to make an ointment. Tussim, which we translate as strawberries, I'm not sure that they were always called strawberries. If it's edible before the flower comes, you're allowed to take their leaves and to feed them to a silkworm, but the fruit themselves are like pagam and boser that you have kedusha shmita, and once they're able to be eaten for a person, then you're not allowed to feed them to a worm, even though it's a silkworm and it's valuable, but you're using food, human food, for a worm. That's not okay. And some say, since the whole purpose that they grow these things and cultivate them is just so the silkworms can make silkworm silk, then you're allowed to give them to the word, but this is not an opinion that you should rely on, says Rav Kook. 22, and I don't know if I'm missing a page in here. I don't see more. What? So I don't know if I missed the page when I was copying this. So no, so in this packet doesn't have either, so probably none of the packets have. So if you ground up spices, so you asked about this a couple minutes ago, if you ground up spices and put them in your food, if their taste is nullified, then you're able to do whatever with it. But if it still has taste from it, then it remains with kedusha shvius. And you could put a fig cake or a dried date cake into a food the same way that you put spices, and you don't have to, but you shouldn't squeeze them to get the juice out of them. So I don't know, Nasreen Karajar, in one of her recipes that she gave for the thing, they use a pomegranate molasses type thing. So I don't know, it's not exactly the same thing, but we could understand that in those days, instead of, a sweetener that they probably had would be these dried out dates and figs. I would assume that they would be usable as a sweetener. So maybe that would be a reason why you would put it into something you were cooking, a stew, whatever. And spices, you're allowed to do this with them because that's the way you deal with spices. You grind them up. You're not allowed to put hay or straw of Shmita into a pillow or into mortar. We know from the Pesach story from Parsha Shemos that they had to put kash, they had to gather kash. Originally, the Egyptians gave them the kash to make in the mortar, and then after Moshe started going, then Paro says, no, you're going to have to get your own kash to put into the mortar. But if you put it, then it's considered that it was already made bior. And the Yerushalmi says that this is only if you slept on the pillow, then it became like that it was bior. But if you put it in the pillow and you didn't use the pillow yet, it's not considered that the bior happened, and you have to take it out of the pillow and treat it with kedusha shmita like it should have. And in regard to mortar, this is when you mixed it up together. But if you didn't actually, put it into the rest of the mixture of the thing and mix it all together, just by putting it in, it still has Shmita produce. I mean, sanctity of Shmita until you actually mixed it in. And then the Rambam finishes off, an oven that you had fueled with straw or hay of Shmita, you have to let it cool down. Oh, this is from a few halachas ago. And when the second rain comes after in the 8th year, then you're allowed to get benefit and you're allowed to burn it. And the Yerushalmi says that which remains extant, you're not allowed to use even after several years. And the only thing that was allowed that you're allowed to use was the stuff that was left in the field because it kind of got ruined from the rain. So the Rambam that he quoted in Halacha Chaf didn't seem to be this strict. Rav Kook seems to be being more strict here. That the Yerushalmi doesn't say about bringing it into the house, but the way Rav Kook quoted the Rambam before, that if you brought it into your house once the second rain fell, you're allowed to get benefit from it. Here he seems to be being a little bit more strict. I'm not sure the difference. And we have reached the beginning of the 6th chapter, so God willing, we will continue there next week.